Hey there, how's it going? Thanks for joining me today. Whether you're relaxing at home, on your commute, or winding down for the evening, I'm really glad you're here. Now, I want you to picture this scene with me. It's 8:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. You're home alone, maybe stirring some pasta sauce or scrolling through your phone, when you hear it. 3 measured raps at your front door. Not the urgent knocking of a neighbor with an emergency, not the quick tap-tap of a delivery driver. 3 deliberate, almost formal knocks. You walk to the door, maybe checking the peephole first. Standing there is someone who looks normal. Completely, utterly normal. Except for something you can't quite put your finger on. Their clothes seem slightly off. The fabric has this subtle shimmer to it, and the cut is just a little different from anything you've seen in stores. Not weird enough to be alarming, but enough to make your brain quietly register that something isn't quite right. You open the door. "My name is Sarah Chen," she says, her voice calm and measured. "I'm from the year 2157, and in exactly 4 minutes, you're going to receive news that changes your life. I'm here to help you make a different choice." Now think about that for a second. What would happen inside your head at that exact moment? Because here's what's fascinating about this scenario. Your brain would literally split in 2. The rational part would be screaming impossibility. Time travel is science fiction. This person is clearly delusional or playing some elaborate prank. But there's another part, isn't there? That gut feeling that whispers, what if? What if it's actually true? Your pupils would dilate, your heart rate would spike. That ancient fight or flight response would kick in because your nervous system doesn't know how to process something that shouldn't exist but is standing right in front of you, speaking in complete sentences and looking you directly in the eye. This is humanity's deepest fantasy and our most primal fear all rolled into one moment. Meeting someone who has broken free from time's iron grip. Someone who has done what every human being has dreamed of doing since we first understood that yesterday was gone forever and tomorrow might never come. And here's the crazy part. We've been dreaming about this exact scenario for thousands of years. Literally thousands. In ancient Hindu texts, they describe gods moving between yugas, cosmic ages that span millions of years, like we might walk between rooms. The Cherokee have stories of warriors who vanished during battle, only to return unchanged while entire generations had lived and died. The Celtic myths speak of people stumbling into fairy rings and emerging to find that centuries had passed in what felt like hours. Every culture, every civilization, every corner of human experience has wrestled with this same impossible dream. Why do you think that is? What is it about time travel that captures something so fundamental in the human experience? I think it's because time is the one thing we can't control. We can learn to fly, we can split atoms, we can talk to someone on the other side of the planet instantly, but we cannot go back and undo that thing we said, or skip forward to see how our story ends. Time holds us prisoner, and somewhere deep in our collective unconscious, we rebel against that imprisonment. But here's where things get really interesting. Because while we've been dreaming about time travelers for millennia, some pretty strange things have actually happened that make you wonder if maybe, just maybe, some of those dreams have already come true. Let me tell you about the woman at Charlie Chaplin's movie premiere. It's 1928, and the circus is having its big Hollywood debut. Someone's filming the event, capturing all the excitement and glamour of the era. Decades later, when people are watching this old footage, they notice something impossible. There's a woman walking across the frame, and she appears to be talking on a cell phone. In 1928, almost 50 years before cell phones were invented. Now, I know what you're thinking. It had to be something else, right? Maybe an early hearing aid or some other device. But here's what makes it so unsettling. The way she's holding it, the way she's talking into it, the casual manner in which she's using it. It's exactly how someone would use a cell phone. The footage is clear enough that you can see she's having a conversation, moving the device away from her ear and then back again, just like you or I would do today. The rational explanations feel forced when you actually watch it, because if you saw someone on the street today behaving exactly like this woman, you wouldn't think twice about it. It's only when you remember that this is 1928 that your brain starts screaming impossible. But that's just the beginning. Let me tell you about Andrew Carlson. In January of 2003, this completely unknown guy gets arrested by the Securities and Exchange Commission. His crime? Making money. Too much money, too fast. Here's what happened. Carlson had started with $800. Through 126 consecutive successful trades, he had turned that $800 into $350 million. 126 wins, 0 losses. Now, you might be thinking, okay, maybe he was just incredibly lucky or incredibly smart. But here's what made investigators suspicious. Some of his trades were based on information that wasn't publicly available yet. He was betting on outcomes that hadn't been announced, and he was right every single time. When they arrested him, Carlson told investigators something that still gives me chills. He claimed he was from the year 2256, and that in his time, these stock fluctuations were well-documented historical events. He said he'd travelled back to make some money, but he'd gotten greedy and made too many perfect trades, drawing attention to himself. The authorities, of course, didn't believe him, but they couldn't explain how he'd done what he'd done. And then, right before his trial was supposed to begin, Andrew Carlson disappeared, just vanished. His lawyer said he never showed up for their final meeting, and nobody ever saw him again. The case was quietly closed and mostly forgotten, but if you dig into the financial records, you can still find traces of those 126 impossible trades. And then there's my personal favourite, the story of Anne Moberly and Eleanor Jourdain, two very proper English ladies, both academics at Oxford University. On August 10th, 1901, they decided to visit Versailles while on vacation in France. They were looking for the Petit Trianon, Marie Antoinette's private estate within the palace grounds. What happened next was documented in meticulous detail, because both women were trained academics who understood the importance of accurate record-keeping. As they walked through the gardens, everything began to feel strange. The air became heavy and oppressive. The landscape looked different somehow, more formal, more manicured than the somewhat overgrown gardens they'd seen earlier. They encountered people dressed in what looked like 18th century clothing. Not costume clothing, but clothing that looked lived in, natural, worn in the way that only genuine period garments can be. The people seemed to see them, but showed no surprise at their obviously modern dress. The most startling moment came when they saw a woman sitting near a small cottage sketching in a book. She looked up at them, and both Moberly and Jourdain were struck by her face. Beautiful, melancholy, and somehow familiar. Later, when they compared the woman's appearance to historical portraits, they became convinced they had seen Marie Antoinette herself in the summer of 1789, just months before the French Revolution would destroy her world forever. The experience lasted about an hour. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, everything returned to normal. The oppressive feeling lifted, the formally dressed people vanished, and they found themselves back in the familiar tourist-filled Versailles of 1901. Both women were deeply shaken by the experience. They spent years researching what they'd seen, comparing their memories to historical records. Details they remembered, the location of buildings, the layout of paths, even the clothing styles, matched historical documents about Versailles as it existed in 1789, not as it appeared in 1901. They published their account 10 years later, using pseudonyms because they were afraid of damaging their academic reputations. The book caused a sensation and sparked debates that continue to this day. Because here's the thing. Both women were rational, educated, credible witnesses. They had no reason to make up such a story, and everything to lose by telling it. Now, you might be thinking these are just strange coincidences, misidentifications, hoaxes, or delusions. And you might be right. The rational part of your brain is probably working overtime right now, coming up with perfectly logical explanations for each of these incidents. But here's what I want you to consider. What if they're not? What if sometimes the impossible actually happens? What if time isn't the rigid, unbreakable prison we think it is? What if there are cracks in reality that occasionally allow someone to slip through? Because the more you dig into these stories, the more you realize that they're not isolated incidents. They're part of a pattern that stretches back through recorded history and continues right up to today. People appearing in the wrong time, knowing things they couldn't possibly, possessing technology that doesn't exist yet, or remembering events that haven't happened. The internet has made it easier to collect these stories, but it's also made it easier to dismiss them. After all, anyone can post anything online. But some of the accounts are so detailed, so consistent, and so thoroughly documented that they make you wonder. There are investment firms that have hired teams of physicists to scan financial markets for signs of temporal arbitrage, ID, someone trading with knowledge from the future. Government agencies have protocols for investigating what they call temporal anomalies. Research institutions are seriously studying the theoretical physics of time travel, not as science fiction, but as potentially achievable science fact. And here's what's really wild. Every major advance in our understanding of physics over the last century has made time travel seem more possible, not less. Einstein's theories showed us that time isn't constant, that it can be stretched and compressed. Modern quantum mechanics suggests that cause and effect might not always work the way we think they do. Some of the brightest minds in physics are now saying that the question isn't whether time travel is possible, but how we might actually do it. So let me ask you this. What would you do if it happened to you? What would you do if that knock came at your door tonight? If someone stood there in clothes that looked slightly wrong and told you they were from the future, how would you know if they were telling the truth? What would you ask them? And most importantly, would you be brave enough to believe them? Because that's what all of these stories really come down to. They're not just about time travel. They're about the moment when everything you thought you knew about reality gets turned upside down. They're about standing at the edge of the impossible and having to decide whether to take that leap of faith or step back into the safety of the world you understand. The knock at your door might be a time traveler, or it might just be someone playing an elaborate prank. But in that moment when you have to decide what to believe, you're confronting something much bigger than just one strange visitor. You're confronting the possibility that the universe is far stranger, far more wonderful, and far more terrifying than you ever imagined. And that's a conversation that goes much deeper than time travel. It goes to the heart of what it means to be human in a cosmos that might be full of impossible things just waiting for us to discover them. So what would you do? Would you slam the door and call the police? Would you invite them in for coffee and pepper them with questions? Would you demand proof? Or would you trust that feeling in your gut that whispers, maybe, just maybe, this is real? Think about it. Because if time travelers are out there, if they're walking among us right now, then everything we think we know about reality is just the beginning of a much larger story. And that story is about to get very, very interesting. Long before Albert Einstein shattered Isaac Newton's perfectly ordered clockwork universe, long before anyone had even dreamed of equations that could describe the fabric of space-time, humanity was already wrestling with time's deepest mysteries. And the crazy thing is, we got a lot of it right. Not through mathematics or experimentation, but through something far more fundamental, our storytelling. Let me take you back over 2,000 years ago, to ancient India, and a story that's been passed down through generations, the Mahabharata, one of the longest epic poems ever written, tells the tale of King Kakudmi. Now, this isn't just any king. He's got a problem that every parent can relate to. His daughter, Revati, has reached marriageable age, and he can't find anyone worthy of her hand. So what does he do? He decides to go straight to the top. He travels to meet Brahma himself, the creator god, to ask for advice about finding the perfect husband for his daughter. The journey feels like it takes just moments. He arrives, waits briefly for Brahma to finish listening to some celestial music, then presents his case. Brahma listens patiently, then begins to laugh. Not unkindly, but with the sort of cosmic amusement that comes from seeing across vast stretches of time. "My dear king," Brahma says, "while you've been here for what feels like a few minutes, 27 cycles of the 4 ages have passed on Earth. Everyone you knew, everyone you were considering as potential suitors for your daughter, their children, their grandchildren, their entire lineage, all of it is dust." Think about that for a second. Over 2,000 years ago, ancient storytellers were grappling with the idea that time could flow differently in different places, that what feels like minutes in one realm could be centuries in another. They didn't have physics to explain it, but they understood something profound about the nature of time itself, and India wasn't alone in this. Half a world away, the Irish were telling their own version of the same story, the legend of Oisin and Tir na Nog, the land of the young. Oisin, son of the great warrior Finn, falls in love with Neem, a woman from the other world. She takes him to her realm where time moves differently, where 3 days feel like 3 wonderful days. But when he returns to Ireland, he discovers that 300 years have passed. His father is long dead, his warrior band is legend, and the world he knew has vanished into history. The pattern repeats everywhere you look. Chinese tales speak of immortals who can manipulate time itself, where a single night in the realm of the gods equals decades in the mortal world. Jewish stories tell of Honi the circle drawer, who falls asleep under a carob tree and wakes 70 years later to find the world transformed. In Japanese folklore, Urashima Taro visits an underwater palace for what seems like a few days, only to return and discover that centuries have passed. What's remarkable is how consistent these stories are across cultures that had no contact with each other. Every civilization seems to have sensed something fundamental about time, that it might not be as fixed and constant as our daily experience suggests, that there might be places or circumstances where time behaves differently. But here's where things get really interesting. As humanity entered the industrial age, our relationship with time began to change dramatically. Suddenly, time wasn't just about the sun rising and setting, or the changing of seasons. Time became mechanical, tickable, measurable, controllable. Factory whistles divided the day into precise segments. Railroad schedules demanded coordination across vast distances. Pocket watches became common, then essential. For the first time in human history, millions of people were living their lives according to the artificial rhythm of machines rather than the natural rhythm of the earth. And this shift in how we experience time began to change how we imagined manipulating it. Washington Irving's 1819 story Rip Van Winkle shows this transition perfectly. Rip doesn't travel through time via magic or divine intervention. He simply sleeps through it. He falls asleep before the American Revolution and wakes up after it, missing the transformation of his entire world. It's a very mechanical concept of time travel, almost industrial in its simplicity. Mark Twain takes this further in 1889 with A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court. His protagonist doesn't just sleep through time, he's transported there by a blow to the re-time head, like a machine being switched from one setting to another. And crucially, he brings industrial knowledge with him, using his understanding of technology to reshape the medieval world. But then comes Herbert George Wells in 18 95, and everything changes forever. Wells was an unlikely revolutionary, a failed draper's apprentice who turned to teaching and then writing, struggling to make ends meet while his mind raced with scientific possibilities. When he wrote The Time Machine, he did something that no storyteller before him had ever done. He made time travel technological. Think about how radical this was. For thousands of years, moving through time had required magic, divine intervention, or extraordinary circumstances. Wells said, essentially, what if you could just build a machine to do it? What if time was like space, a dimension you could navigate with the right vehicle? The time machine wasn't magic. It didn't require gods or wishes or cosmic accidents. It was technology, pure and simple. A device that moved through the fourth dimension like a train moves through the countryside. Wells gave time travel rules, limitations, and most importantly, he gave it consequences. This is where Wells becomes a true prophet of the scientific age. He doesn't just send his time traveler forward, he makes him think like a scientist. The time traveler observes, theorizes, tests his assumptions. He worries about paradoxes 40 years before physicists would give them names. He considers the implications of changing the past, the responsibility that comes with knowledge of the future. And here's the part that gives me chills every time I think about it. A young patent clerk named Albert Einstein was reading Wells around this same time. Picture this. 16-year-old Einstein, working his way through the time machine, his mind already filled with questions about the nature of light and motion and space. Wells plants a seed in that brilliant mind. What if time really is like a dimension? What if the relationship between time and space is more complex than we think? Einstein later credited thought experiments, imaginary scenarios, as crucial to his breakthrough discoveries. His most famous one? Imagining what it would be like to ride alongside a beam of light. What would you see? How would the universe look if you were traveling at the speed of light itself? That thought experiment, inspired in part by the kind of scientific imagination that Wells had pioneered, grew into special relativity by 1905. And special relativity revealed something extraordinary. Time really isn't constant. It really can be stretched and compressed. Wells's fiction was becoming Einstein's physics. By 1915, Einstein had developed general relativity, which went even further. Not only was time flexible, but massive objects could actually warp the fabric of space-time itself. A clock near a massive object would tick slower than one farther away. Time dilation wasn't science fiction anymore, it was mathematical fact. Then Hermann Minkowski, Einstein's former mathematics professor, showed that past, present, and future all exist simultaneously in four-dimensional space-time. What we call now is just where our consciousness happens to be located in this vast eternal structure. Time travel, from this perspective, might just be a matter of consciousness moving to a different location in space-time. And if that wasn't mind-bending enough, in 1949, Kurt Gödel, CIS, the same mathematician who proved that there are mathematical truths that can never be proven, found solutions to Einstein's field equations that allowed for closed time-like curves, mathematical time loops, paths through space-time that curve back to their own beginning. Einstein was deeply disturbed by this. He'd created the mathematical framework, but he didn't like where it was leading. The idea that his equations might actually permit time travel made him profoundly uncomfortable. But the mathematics didn't care about his comfort level. The equations said what they said. So within 50 years, we'd gone from Wells's imaginative leap to rigorous mathematical proof that time travel might actually be possible. Fiction had become science, dreams had become equations, and humanity's oldest fantasy was suddenly looking like it might be humanity's future reality. But here's what I find most remarkable about this whole progression. The ancient storytellers, with no understanding of physics or mathematics, intuited something about time that turned out to be absolutely correct. Time isn't the rigid, unchanging backdrop that our everyday experience suggests. It's flexible, relative, and deeply connected to space, gravity, and motion. Those myths and legends weren't just entertainment or moral instruction. They were attempts to grapple with something fundamental about the nature of reality. And in a strange way, they prepared us for the scientific discoveries that were coming. When Einstein announced that time was relative, that simultaneity was an illusion, that the universe was far stranger than anyone had imagined, humanity wasn't completely shocked. We'd been telling ourselves stories about fluid time for thousands of years. The physics just confirmed what our deepest instincts had always whispered. That time was far more mysterious than it appeared. Today, time travel is a serious subject of scientific research. Physicists at major universities are studying traversable wormholes, closed time-like curves, and quantum chronodynamics. NASA has funded research into the theoretical possibilities of faster-than-light travel and temporal mechanics. The Pentagon has classified protocols for temporal anomalies. We've come so far from those ancient stories of gods and immortals, yet in another sense, we've come full circle. Because what modern physics is telling us sounds remarkably like what those old storytellers always knew, that time is not the prison we think it is, that the past and future might be more accessible than we imagine, and that reality is far stranger and more wonderful than our limited perspective allows us to see. The bridge between dreams and science is complete. Now, the question isn't whether time travel is possible, but when we'll figure out how to do it. And that's a story that's still being written in laboratories and universities around the world by people who grew up reading about time machines and decided to spend their lives trying to build them. The dreams that became science are becoming reality, and that transformation is happening faster than you might think. Here's what breaks most people's minds when they first learn about it. Time travel isn't science fiction. It's not some far-off theoretical possibility. It's happening right now, above your head, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And if it stopped happening, your GPS would be off by 7 miles within a single day. I'm talking about the satellites orbiting our planet at this very moment. There are 31 of them in the Global Positioning System constellation, each one carrying atomic clocks that are among the most precise timekeeping devices ever created. And every single one of those clocks is experiencing time differently than we are down here on Earth's surface. Because of their speed, they're moving at about 8,700 miles per hour, and because they're higher up in Earth's gravitational field, time moves slightly faster for those satellites than it does for us. We're talking about 38 microseconds per day. That might not sound like much, but when you're trying to pinpoint your location using signals that travel at the speed of light, 38 microseconds translates to about 7 miles of error. Think about that. Every time you use your phone's GPS to navigate somewhere, the system has to compensate for time travel. If the engineers hadn't understood Einstein's relativity and built those corrections into the system, your GPS would drift further and further off course with each passing day. The theoretical physics of time travel is literally essential to getting you to your destination. But it gets even more mind-bending. Astronaut Scott Kelly spent 340 days aboard the International Space Station while his identical twin brother Mark stayed on Earth. When Scott returned, scientists compared their ages down to the cellular level. The result? Scott had aged 5 milliseconds less than his Earthbound twin. 5 milliseconds might not sound like much, but it's measurable, it's real, and it's time travel. Scott Kelly literally travelled 5 milliseconds into Mark's future, not through some exotic machine or cosmic accident, but simply by moving fast and spending time in a slightly weaker gravitational field. The universe doesn't just allow time travel, it mandates it under certain conditions. Now, let me help you visualize what's actually happening here, because Einstein's description of space-time is one of the most beautiful concepts in all of physics. Imagine space-time as a vast cosmic trampoline, stretched tight and smooth. Now place a bowling ball in the center. That's a massive object like the sun or the earth. The trampoline dips and curves around the bowling ball, creating what we call a gravity well. If you roll a marble across this curved surface, it doesn't travel in a straight line anymore. It follows the curves created by the bowling ball. That marble represents anything with mass: planets, spaceships, people, light itself. We think we're feeling the force of gravity, but we're actually just following the curved geometry of space-time. The deeper the curve, the stronger the gravitational effect. And here's the crucial part: the slower time moves. Stand at the bottom of a mountain, and you're deeper in Earth's gravity well than someone standing at the peak. You'll age marginally slower than the person at the mountaintop. The difference is incredibly tiny. We're talking nanoseconds over a lifetime, but it's real and measurable. Now, let's take this to its logical extreme. What happens when you get close to something so massive that it creates an incredibly deep dip in space-time? What happens when you approach a black hole? At the center of our galaxy sits Sagittarius A star, a supermassive black hole containing the mass of 4 million suns compressed into a region smaller than our solar system. If you could somehow survive getting close to it, and that's a big if, the time dilation effects would be extraordinary. Picture this scenario. You're in a spacecraft approaching the black hole while your friend stays safely far away. From your perspective, everything seems normal. Your watch ticks normally, you think and move at normal speed. But from your friend's perspective, watching through a powerful telescope, you would appear to slow down dramatically. As you get closer to the black hole, your friend would see you moving more and more slowly. Your gestures would become sluggish. Your speech would drop in pitch and stretch out. If you waved at your friend, that wave might take hours to complete from their perspective, even though it feels instant to you. And if you were somehow able to cross the event horizon, the point of no return around a black hole, something incredible would happen. From your friend's perspective, you would appear to freeze at the event horizon, your image slowly fading and redshifting until it disappeared. But you wouldn't experience stopping at all. You'd continue falling inward, and in your final moments, you'd see something extraordinary. Because time dilation works both ways. While you appear frozen to your distant friend, they appear to be speeding up from your perspective. In your final moments before being torn apart by tidal forces, you would witness the entire future history of the universe playing out in fast forward. Galaxies would form and collide, stars would be born and die, civilizations might rise and fall, all compressed into the last few seconds of your subjective experience. It's the ultimate time travel experience, a one-way trip to the end of time itself. But black holes aren't the only way the universe says yes to time travel. There are other mechanisms, other possibilities that emerge from the mathematics of general relativity. Take traversable wormholes, for instance. Kip Thorne, the Nobel Prize-winning physicist who consulted on the movie Interstellar, has calculated exactly what it would take to create and maintain a stable wormhole, a tunnel through space-time, connecting two distant points. The requirements are exotic, to put it mildly. You'd need something called negative energy density, MAE, matter with less than zero energy, which would create a repulsive gravitational effect. This isn't just theoretical. Quantum mechanics actually predicts that negative energy density can exist in very specific circumstances. It's been measured in laboratory experiments, though in incredibly tiny amounts. But if you could somehow gather enough of this exotic matter and arrange it properly, you could theoretically create a tunnel through space-time. And here's where it gets really interesting for time travel. If you could move one end of the wormhole at high speed relative to the other end, time dilation would make the two mouths age at different rates. Eventually, you'd have a wormhole where one mouth exists in the past relative to the other. Step through one way, and you travel to the future. Step through the other way, and you travel to the past. It would be the ultimate subway system, IM, not just connecting different places, but different times. Then there's the Tipler cylinder, proposed by physicist Frank Tipler. Picture a cylinder 100 kilometers long and incredibly dense. We're talking about the density of neutron star material. If you could spin this cylinder at half the speed of light, it would twist space-time into a kind of spiral around it. The mathematics show that if you followed a specific path around this spinning cylinder, you could end up back where you started. But in the past, it's like space-time gets wound up so tightly that it loops back on itself. The energy requirements are astronomical. You'd need the mass energy of an entire star just to build the thing, but the physics check out. And then there are cosmic strings, theoretical cracks in the fabric of space-time itself, left over from the very earliest moments after the Big Bang. These would be impossibly thin, narrower than an atomic nucleus, but incredibly dense, with the mass of mountains contained in lengths thinner than human hair. Richard Gott, a Princeton physicist, proved in 1991 that if two cosmic strings passed by each other at nearly the speed of light, they would create closed time-like curves in their wake. The space-time distortion would be so severe that anything following the right trajectory could end up back where it started, but earlier in time. The beautiful thing about all these mechanisms is that they don't violate any known laws of physics. They're difficult. They require exotic conditions or materials. They would need incredible amounts of energy, but they're not impossible. The universe seems almost designed to allow time travel, as if the cosmos is keeping the door cracked open, waiting for us to become clever enough to walk through it. In fact, some physicists argue that the universe not only allows time travel but might actually require it under certain circumstances. Quantum mechanics suggests that particles can sometimes travel backward in time at the subatomic level. Experiments with delayed choice quantum erasers seem to show that decisions made in the present can retroactively determine what happened in the past. And here's perhaps the most mind-bending possibility of all. The many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics suggests that every possible outcome of every quantum event creates a branching timeline. If that's true, then time travel might not create paradoxes at all. Instead, traveling to the past might simply split you off into an alternate timeline, a parallel universe where your presence becomes part of that world's history. From this perspective, time travel doesn't risk unraveling causality, e.g., it creates new realities. Every time traveler becomes the founder of a new branch of existence, a new version of history where their arrival was always part of the story. What's remarkable is how all of this emerged from Einstein's simple insight about the nature of space and time. He started with the observation that the speed of light is constant for all observers, and from that single principle, he derived a completely new understanding of reality. Space and time aren't separate things, they're aspects of a single, unified space-time. Matter and energy don't exist within space-time, they curve and shape it. And time isn't the universal constant that Newton thought it was. It's flexible, relative, and intimately connected to gravity and motion. The universe revealed to us by modern physics is far stranger than anything our ancestors imagined, yet it's also more beautiful. We live in a cosmos where time can stretch and compress, where space can curve back on itself, where the past and future are just different regions of a vast four-dimensional landscape that exists all at once. Time travel isn't just possible in this universe, it's inevitable under the right conditions. Every time you accelerate, every time you climb a mountain, every time you experience gravity, you're experiencing time differently than you would in the absence of those effects. The universe is constantly demonstrating its willingness to let us manipulate time. We just need to figure out how to do it on a larger scale. And that's exactly what scientists around the world are working on right now. The universe has said yes to time travel. Now, it's up to us to learn how to ask the right questions. Ronald Mallett was 10 years old when his world ended. It was 1955, and he was sitting in his family's living room when his father suddenly clutched his chest and collapsed. Heart attack. 33 years old, gone in minutes. That moment, watching his father die, seeing the finality of it, understanding that there was absolutely nothing he could do to bring him back, he put Ronald on a 60-year quest that would consume his entire adult life. He became obsessed with a single, impossible goal: building a time machine that could take him back to that moment, back to a time when he could warn his father, save his life, prevent that devastating loss. Most kids who lose a parent at that age might dream about turning back time, but they eventually accept reality and move on. Ronald Mallett never did. Instead, he discovered H.G. Wells's The Time Machine at his local library, and that discovery changed everything. If Wells could imagine a machine that moved through time, why couldn't someone actually build one? By the time Mallett was in his 60s, he had become a professor of physics at the University of Connecticut, and he had done something that no one else had ever done. He had designed a working time machine. Well, theoretically working. Let me explain how it would operate, because it's actually ingenious in its simplicity. Mallett's time machine uses circulating laser beams to twist space and time. Remember how massive objects create curves in space-time? Mallett realized that circulating energy, high, light moving in a closed loop, could theoretically create the same effect. Picture a ring of mirrors arranged in a circle, with laser beams bouncing between them, creating a vortex of circulating light. According to general relativity, this ring of energy would create a kind of gravitational field, and more importantly, it would twist space-time around it. Particles dropped into the center of this ring might experience closed time-like curves. They might emerge before they were dropped in. Mallett built prototypes. He ran calculations. He published papers in peer-reviewed journals. The mathematics work out. In principle, his machine could create the kind of space-time distortion that would allow time travel. But here's the heartbreaking part. Even if it worked perfectly, it could only send information or particles back to the moment when the machine was first turned on. You can't travel to a time before your time machine existed. Ronald Mallett's lifelong quest to save his father was doomed from the start. Even if he succeeded in building a working time machine, it would be too late to reach that terrible day in 1955. When Mallett talks about this realization, you can see the weight of it in his eyes. 60 years of his life devoted to an impossible rescue mission. But rather than giving up, he pressed on. Because even though he couldn't save his father, he might be able to give future generations the gift of time travel. He might be able to ensure that no other child would have to lose a parent to something that could have been prevented with just a little advance warning. Mallett's story represents something profound about the human relationship with time. We're the only species that's truly aware of our own mortality, the only creatures that understand that yesterday is gone forever and tomorrow might never come. And that awareness drives some of us to extraordinary lengths, to devote entire lifetimes to the dream of breaking free from time's prison. But Mallett isn't the only hunter of time. The scientific community has produced some remarkable characters in this quest, none more famous than Stephen Hawking. On June 28, 2009, Stephen Hawking threw a party. Not just any party, a party specifically for time travelers. He sent out invitations that read, "You are cordially invited to a reception for time travelers, held by Professor Stephen Hawking to welcome all time travelers." Location: University of Cambridge. Date: 28 June 2009. Here's the clever part. He didn't publicize the party until after it had happened. The reasoning was simple. If time travel were possible, then future time travelers would eventually see the invitation and could travel back to attend the party retroactively. All Hawking had to do was wait. He set up champagne, balloons, decorations, the works. He sat in his wheelchair in the decorated room, waiting for visitors from the future. And nobody came. Not a single time traveler showed up. For Hawking, this empty party was more than just a publicity stunt. It was experimental evidence for what he called the chronology protection conjecture, his theory that the universe somehow prevents time travel to the past, that the laws of physics contain built-in safeguards against paradoxes. Hawking's reasoning went like this: if time travel to the past were possible, we should see evidence of it. Time travelers would leave traces, create paradoxes, or at minimum, show up to parties thrown specifically for them. The fact that we don't see these things suggests that the universe has ways of preventing time travel, even when the mathematics seem to allow it. But here's where things get interesting. Just 1 year after Hawking's party, physicist Seth Lloyd at MIT published research that turned the chronology protection conjecture on its head. Lloyd showed that quantum mechanics might actually enable time travel rather than prevent it. At the quantum level, things behave very differently than they do in our everyday experience. Particles can exist in multiple states simultaneously. They can be entangled across vast distances, and they can exhibit what looks like backward causation, effects that seem to happen before their causes. Lloyd's work focused on particles called kaons, which are produced in high-energy particle accelerators. When scientists study kaon decay patterns, they sometimes see something extraordinary. The particle seems to know how it's going to be measured before the measurement actually takes place. It's as if information about the future measurement travels backward in time to influence the particle's behavior in the present. This isn't science fiction. It's been repeatedly observed and verified. Quantum mechanics appears to allow, and maybe even require, a limited form of backward causation. If Lloyd is right, then Hawking's chronology protection conjecture might be wrong. The universe might not just allow time travel, what AEZ. At the quantum level, it might depend on it. This discovery opened up entirely new avenues of research. If quantum effects can send information backward in time, maybe we can harness those effects for macroscopic time travel. Maybe the trick isn't fighting against quantum mechanics, but learning to amplify quantum time travel effects to larger scales. And that's exactly what researchers around the world are now trying to do. The hunt for time travel has moved from the theoretical to the experimental, from thought experiments to actual laboratory work. At universities across the globe, scientists are scanning historical photographs with artificial intelligence, looking for anachronisms, modern objects, or people who appear in images from before they should have existed. They're analyzing internet traffic patterns, searching for information that appears online before it should logically be available. They're monitoring financial markets for signs of impossible foreknowledge, trades that are too perfect to be explained by normal means. Some of the most intriguing work is happening at the intersection of quantum computing and temporal mechanics. Google's quantum computer, for instance, has demonstrated what researchers call reverse causation at the quantum level. In certain experiments, the computer's output seems to influence its own input, creating loops in time that shouldn't be possible according to classical physics. IBM researchers have detected what they call temporal anomalies in qubit behavior, quantum bits that seem to exist in multiple time states simultaneously. These effects are microscopic and brief, lasting only nanoseconds, but they represent genuine departures from normal causality. Meanwhile, the search for naturally occurring time travel has intensified. SETI protocols, AC, originally designed to search for extraterrestrial intelligence, have been adapted to search for temporal intelligence. Instead of scanning for radio signals from space, researchers are now scanning for the temporal equivalent, knowledge appearing before its time, linguistic patterns that suggest communication from the future, or isotope signatures that indicate exposure to cosmic radiation from dates that haven't happened yet. One of the most promising recent developments has been the creation of time crystals, AGE, structures in matter that repeat in time rather than space. In 2016, researchers successfully created the first time crystals, materials that oscillate between different states indefinitely without any energy input. These structures appear to break time translation symmetry, one of the fundamental symmetries that physicists thought governed all of nature. Time crystals don't enable time travel directly, but they represent something profound, proof that time can have structure, that temporal patterns can be built into matter itself. If we can create materials with temporal structure, maybe we can eventually create materials that interact with time in more dramatic ways. The research is accelerating. Quantum laboratories around the world are pushing the boundaries of what's possible with quantum entanglement and quantum superposition. Some experiments are now achieving what researchers call quantum time dilation, creating scenarios where quantum particles experience time differently than their classical counterparts. In China, researchers have demonstrated quantum temporal superposition, where particles appear to exist in multiple time states simultaneously. In Austria, scientists have created closed quantum time-like curves, paths that particles can follow that loop back to their own beginning. Each breakthrough is small, measured in nanoseconds or involving only individual particles, but the pattern is clear. We're learning to manipulate time at the quantum level. The question now is whether these quantum effects can be scaled up to macroscopic levels, whether the time travel that's possible for individual particles can eventually be possible for entire objects or even people. The hunters of time are no longer just theoretical physicists scribbling equations on blackboards. They're experimental scientists with billion-dollar laboratories, quantum computers, and particle accelerators. They're programmers writing algorithms to detect temporal anomalies in massive datasets. They're engineers designing experiments that probe the deepest foundations of causality itself, and they're making progress. Not the dramatic, science fiction kind of progress where someone builds a time machine in their garage, but the steady, incremental progress of serious science. Each experiment reveals new aspects of time's behavior, new possibilities for manipulation, new hints that the universe might be more flexible about causality than we ever imagined. Ronald Mallet may never save his father, but his laser-based time machine design has inspired a new generation of temporal researchers. Stephen Hawking's party may have been empty, but his challenge to the physics community has sparked innovations in quantum temporal mechanics that are still bearing fruit today. The hunt for time travel has evolved from a quest born of grief and imagination into a rigorous scientific endeavor. And while we haven't yet achieved the dramatic time travel of science fiction, we've achieved something arguably more important. We've proven that time travel is not just theoretically possible, but practically inevitable under the right circumstances. The universe has shown us that it's willing to let us manipulate time. Now it's just a matter of learning to ask nicely. And the hunters of time, armed with quantum computers and particle accelerators and an ever deeper understanding of space-time itself, are getting very good at asking. If a time traveler walked up to you tomorrow and introduced themselves, how would you know they were telling the truth? It's a more complex question than you might think, because a genuine time traveler wouldn't necessarily arrive with obvious signs of their temporal origin. They wouldn't step out of a glowing machine or wear clothes that scream, "I'm from the future." If they were smart, and any society advanced enough for time travel would presumably be quite smart, they'd try to blend in. But here's the thing about trying to blend in across time. It's almost impossible to do perfectly. Time leaves its fingerprints on everything, and those fingerprints are surprisingly difficult to fake or hide. Language betrays time travelers first, and in ways that most people never consider. Let me explain what I mean. Every generation, roughly 20% of commonly used words change. Not just the slang terms or technical vocabulary, but fundamental words that we use every day. The way we pronounce things shifts. Our sentence structure evolves. Even our basic assumptions about how conversation works undergo subtle transformations. Linguist Mark Pagel has calculated what he calls language half-lives, how long it takes for 50% of a vocabulary to be replaced. Basic words like water, fire, and mother have half-lives of around 20,000 years. They're so fundamental to human experience that they change very slowly. But specialized terms, cultural references, and even common expressions have much shorter half-lives, sometimes just a few decades. Now, imagine someone from 2157 trying to speak English in 2025. They wouldn't just use new words that we haven't invented yet. Their entire speech pattern, their rhythm, their way of constructing thoughts and expressing ideas would be different. It would be like trying to have a conversation with someone from Shakespeare's time, except in reverse. They might use words that sound familiar but with meanings that have shifted. They might construct sentences in ways that sound almost right but feel subtly off. Most tellingly, they might fail to use expressions or references that everyone in our time period takes for granted, while unconsciously reaching for phrases that won't exist for another century. A genuine time traveler's speech would be a mixture of archaic stability and incomprehensible evolution. They might pronounce water the same way we do, because that word changes so slowly, but their way of discussing abstract concepts, their humor, their cultural assumptions, all of that would mark them as foreign to our time. But language is just the beginning. Time travelers would carry physical evidence of their temporal origin in ways that would be nearly impossible to fake. Let's start with isotope ratios. Every living thing on Earth incorporates elements from the environment into their body tissues. The specific ratios of different isotopes, IM, variants of elements with different numbers of neutrons, reflect the cosmic radiation exposure, atmospheric composition, and industrial activity of the time period when those tissues were formed. Someone from the future would have isotope signatures in their bones, teeth, and hair that reflect the cosmic radiation environment of their era. They might show evidence of exposure to artificial isotopes that don't exist yet, or unusual ratios of natural isotopes that reflect different levels of industrial activity or different cosmic ray exposure patterns. Carbon-14 dating, which we normally use on ancient artifacts, might show negative ages for their clothing or personal items. And 25, materials that appear to come from times that haven't happened yet. Their dental work would be particularly revealing. Dental materials evolve constantly as new alloys and composites are developed. A time traveler might have fillings or dental implants made from materials that haven't been invented yet, using techniques that our dentists have never seen. Even their DNA could betray them. Human genetics don't evolve rapidly over centuries, but genetic drift does occur in isolated populations. More importantly, future humans might have undergone genetic modifications that would be visible in their DNA, corrections for genetic diseases, enhancements for longevity or disease resistance, or adaptations for different environmental conditions. But perhaps most revealing would be their microbiome. 9. The trillions of bacteria that live in and on every human body. These bacterial communities evolve much faster than human genetics, adapting to new environments, new diets, new medical treatments, and new hygiene practices. A time traveler's gut bacteria might include evolved strains that are impossibly advanced compared to current bacterial populations, or they might lack bacterial strains that are common in our time period. The psychological profile would be equally distinctive. Temporal displacement would likely create specific trauma patterns that psychologists could recognize. Imagine the disorientation of suddenly finding yourself in a time where everything you know as normal is either primitive or simply gone. A genuine time traveler would probably make unconscious references to events that haven't happened yet. They might express confusion or frustration at technology that seems primitive to them but is cutting edge to us. They might show muscle memory for interfaces that don't exist yet, reaching for controls that aren't there, making gestures that correspond to future technology. Most revealing might be their mistakes. They might refer to companies by names that result from future mergers. They might mention countries that don't exist yet, or use currency names that haven't been adopted. They might demonstrate knowledge of scientific principles that haven't been discovered or engineering techniques that haven't been developed. But here's where recognition protocols become really important. How do you distinguish between a genuine time traveler and someone who's just delusional, lying, or exceptionally creative? The answer is systematic documentation and testing. And it turns out that governments and research institutions have been thinking about this problem for longer than you might expect. Leaked documents from various intelligence agencies suggest that protocols exist for investigating what they euphemistically call temporal anomalies. These protocols reportedly include immediate isolation of the subject, comprehensive documentation of their claims, systematic testing of their knowledge about future events, and detailed analysis of their physical characteristics. The isolation isn't necessarily hostile, it's protective. If someone really is from the future, their very presence might create paradoxes or temporal instabilities. More practically, their knowledge of future events could be incredibly dangerous if it fell into the wrong hands. Imagine what someone could do with advanced knowledge of stock market crashes, natural disasters, or political changes. The documentation process would be exhaustive. Every statement would be recorded and analyzed. Their knowledge of current events would be tested to establish their baseline understanding of our time period. Their predictions about the future would be catalogued and monitored for accuracy. The physical testing would use every tool available to modern science: DNA sequencing, isotope analysis, detailed medical examination, psychological evaluation, and more. If they claim to have items from the future, those items would undergo materials analysis using every technique available. But the most important part of any recognition protocol would be patience, because the ultimate test of a time traveler's authenticity isn't what they know about the future, it's whether their predictions actually come true, and that takes time to verify. This creates an interesting paradox. By the time you've confirmed that someone really is from the future, their knowledge might no longer be useful for changing outcomes. If they predicted a disaster that you successfully prevented, does that prove they were from a different timeline? If their predictions fail to come true, does that mean they were fake, or that their very presence changed the future they came from? These are the kinds of questions that keep theoretical physicists awake at night. And they're not just academic concerns, they're practical problems that anyone encountering a claimed time traveler would have to address. Some researchers have proposed what they call soft verification protocols, ways to test time traveler claims without creating paradoxes or dangerous situations. These might include asking about verifiable but obscure historical details that are known to historians but not widely publicized. A genuine time traveler might know details about their own past that they learned as history lessons, details that we could verify in our historical records. They might also demonstrate knowledge of scientific principles that are currently being researched but haven't been publicly announced yet. This would be particularly convincing if their knowledge helped solve current scientific problems or pointed researchers in productive directions. But the most compelling evidence might be technological. If someone claimed to be from the future and demonstrated technology that was clearly beyond current capabilities, not just in terms of manufacturing, but in terms of the underlying scientific five principles, AC, that would be very difficult to fake. The challenge is that advanced technology might be indistinguishable from very sophisticated hoaxes. Arthur C. Clarke's famous observation that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic works in reverse too. Any sufficiently sophisticated fraud might be indistinguishable from advanced technology. This is why recognition protocols focus so heavily on multiple lines of evidence. No single test or observation would be sufficient to confirm time travel. It would require convergent evidence from linguistics, biology, psychology, technology, and verified predictions about future events. And even then, there would be room for doubt, because the implications of genuine time travel are so profound that the evidence would need to be absolutely overwhelming before the scientific community would accept it. Think about what it would mean to definitively confirm that someone is from the future. It would prove that the future already exists in some sense, that free will might be more limited than we think, that causality works differently than we assume. It would validate entire areas of theoretical physics, while potentially invalidating others. It would transform our understanding of consciousness, mortality, and the nature of time itself. The recognition protocols aren't just about identifying time travelers, they're about preparing for the possibility that everything we think we know about reality might be wrong. They're about having systematic procedures in place for the moment when the impossible walks through our door and politely introduces itself, because if that moment comes, if someone really does show up claiming to be from the future, with evidence to back up their claim, the most important thing won't be whether we believe them. It will be whether we're prepared for the conversation that follows, whether we're ready to ask the right questions, gather the right evidence, and grapple with the implications of living in a universe where time travel is not just possible but actual. The protocols exist because someone, somewhere, thinks that conversation might happen sooner than we expect, and when it does, we'll need to be ready. The hunt has gone digital. While physicists build quantum computers and mathematicians calculate wormhole geometries, a different kind of time travel research is happening in the vast archives of the internet. Teams of researchers, some academic, some government-funded, some working independently, are scouring decades of online content, looking for traces of tomorrow that arrived too early. It's called internet archaeology, and it's more sophisticated than you might think. Artificial intelligence algorithms scan through millions of forum posts, social media updates, blog entries, and comment threads, searching for patterns that shouldn't exist. Knowledge that appeared before it should have been available. Predictions that were too accurate to be explained by normal forecasting. References to events, products, or concepts that hadn't been invented yet when the posts were made. The most famous case in this digital detective work is still John Titor. Starting in November 2000, someone using that name began posting on internet forums, claiming to be a soldier from the year 2036. His mission, he said, was to travel back to 1975 to retrieve an IBM 5100 computer, which was needed to debug vintage software that had become critical to his future society. Now, I know what you're thinking. The internet is full of people claiming to be from the future, and most of them are either joking, delusional, or running elaborate hoaxes. But John Titor was different. His technical descriptions were remarkably detailed and internally consistent. He described his time machine as a military-issue device, built around rotating micro-singularities, artificial black holes that could twist space-time enough to create closed, time-like curves. Here's what made his post so intriguing. Many of his technical descriptions matched theoretical breakthroughs that wouldn't be published in peer-reviewed journals until years later. He discussed the physics of closed time-like curves, the problems of temporal paradoxes, and the engineering challenges of stabilizing artificial singularities with a sophistication that was unusual for internet discussion in 2000. Titor also made specific predictions. He warned about civil unrest in the United States, described a coming conflict between rural and urban populations, and predicted that mad cow disease would become a much larger problem than people realized at the time. Some of his predictions were wrong, but others were eerily accurate. Most unsettling, his descriptions of social media and its effects on society were remarkably prescient for someone posting in 2000 years before Facebook or Twitter existed. Then, as mysteriously as he had appeared, John Titor vanished. His last posts were made in March 2001, and despite extensive investigation by both amateur researchers and professional journalists, no one has ever definitively identified who he was or how he acquired such detailed knowledge of theoretical physics and future technology trends. The Titor case was likely an elaborate hoax, The smart money says it was probably a physicist or science fiction writer having some fun with internet communities. But it established something important. It showed that if a real-time traveler wanted to communicate through digital channels, they could potentially do so without being immediately identified. This realization led to more systematic searches. Research teams now monitor major internet platforms for temporal fingerprints, patterns of knowledge that appear before they should. They found some fascinating cases. There are anonymous posts from 2003 that describe smartphone features with remarkable accuracy, posted years before the iPhone was announced. Technical forum discussions from 2005 that predict specific quantum computing breakthroughs with uncanny precision. Investment advice posted on obscure message boards that, if followed, would have yielded extraordinary returns based on knowledge that wasn't publicly available when the posts were made. Most of these are probably coincidences, lucky guesses, or people with inside information presenting it as predictions, but some of the cases are harder to explain. Posts that describe technical details that weren't published anywhere else until years later. Predictions that were so specific and accurate that they would have required access to information that simply didn't exist when they were made. The really intriguing cases are the ones that vanish. Posts that describe future events with remarkable accuracy then disappear from servers, sometimes leaving only cached copies or screenshots as evidence they ever existed. It's as if someone realized they had revealed too much and went back to erase their digital footprints. But the digital hunt is just one front in the search for temporal anomalies. The real breakthrough might be coming from quantum computing, where researchers are pushing the boundaries of what's possible with causality itself. In 2019, Google announced that their quantum processor had achieved something they called quantum supremacy, the ability to perform certain calculations faster than any classical computer could, even in principle. But buried in the technical details of their announcement was something even more remarkable: evidence of what they termed reverse causation at the quantum level. In specific experiments, the quantum computer's output seemed to influence its own input, creating loops in causality that shouldn't be possible according to classical physics. The effects were microscopic and lasted only nanoseconds, but they represented genuine departures from normal cause and effect relationships. IBM researchers have detected similar anomalies in their quantum systems. They call them temporal anomalies in qubit behavior, quantum bits that seem to exist in multiple time states simultaneously. In some experiments, quantum particles appear to receive information about measurements that haven't been performed yet. This isn't science fiction, it's peer-reviewed research published in major physics journals. And it suggests that at the quantum level, time travel might not just be possible but inevitable under certain circumstances. The implications are staggering. If quantum systems can send information backward in time, even on microscopic scales, then maybe we can learn to amplify those effects. Maybe we can create quantum communication channels that work backward through time, sending messages to ourselves in the past. This possibility has led to serious research into what scientists call quantum temporal communication. The idea is that we might achieve time communication before we achieve time travel, sending information through time before we can send matter or people. Meanwhile, financial markets have become an unexpected front in the time travel hunt. Investment firms have quietly hired teams of physicists and mathematicians to scan for signs of temporal arbitrage, TPA, trading based on knowledge from the future. The reasoning is simple. If someone had access to future information, one of the first things they might do is use that knowledge to make money in financial markets. Unlike most other applications of future knowledge, trading doesn't necessarily create obvious paradoxes or draw immediate attention to the time traveler. The monitoring systems these firms have developed are incredibly sophisticated. They scan for trading patterns that are too perfect to be explained by normal analysis, positions that anticipate market movements with impossible accuracy, and investment strategies that seem to be based on information that isn't publicly available yet. The SEC investigates several cases each year of what they euphemistically call impossible market timing. Most turn out to be insider trading, sophisticated algorithm trading, or occasionally just remarkable luck. But some cases remain unexplained, trading patterns that seem to anticipate events that couldn't have been predicted through any available information. The most intriguing cases involve trades that anticipate completely unexpected events, natural disasters, sudden political changes, or technological breakthroughs that no amount of normal analysis could have predicted. These cases are rare, but they happen often enough that multiple government agencies now have protocols for investigating temporal arbitrage. The quantum communication research is accelerating. Laboratories around the world are experimenting with what they call closed quantum time-like curves, quantum systems where information appears to flow backward through time. In China, researchers have demonstrated quantum temporal superposition, where particles exist in multiple time states simultaneously. In Austria, scientists have created quantum systems where cause and effect relationships become ambiguous. Each breakthrough is small, measured in nanoseconds and involving only individual particles. But the pattern is clear. We're learning to manipulate causality at the quantum level. The question now is whether these quantum effects can be scaled up to macroscopic systems. Some researchers think we're close to a breakthrough. They envision quantum communication networks that could send messages backward through time, creating the first genuine temporal communication channels. These wouldn't allow time travel in the science fiction sense, but they would allow communication across time, receiving messages from our future selves before we send them. The implications are profound. Imagine receiving messages from your future self, warning about mistakes to avoid or opportunities to pursue. Imagine scientific research accelerated by communications from future researchers who have already solved the problems we're working on. Imagine the paradoxes and philosophical questions that would arise from conversations that work backward through time. But there's a darker side to these possibilities. Information from the future could be incredibly dangerous in the wrong hands. Future knowledge about natural disasters could be used to profit from others' suffering. Advanced knowledge of scientific breakthroughs could be used to dominate entire industries. Knowledge of political changes could be used to manipulate elections or destabilize governments. This is why much of the current research is classified or conducted under strict security protocols. The potential applications of temporal communication are so powerful that governments and corporations are racing to be the first to achieve practical time messaging, while simultaneously trying to prevent their competitors from gaining the same capabilities. The consensus among researchers is that we might achieve temporal communication within the next few decades. Not the dramatic time travel of science fiction, but something arguably more profound. The ability to communicate across time itself, to receive messages from our future selves and send information to our past. We're standing at the threshold of an age where tomorrow might literally arrive today, where the future and past become participants in present conversations, where causality becomes negotiable rather than fixed. And the strangest part? It's happening quietly, in quantum laboratories and financial trading floors and internet archives, with most people completely unaware that the fundamental nature of time is being rewritten around them. The time travelers might not arrive in glowing machines or with obvious signs of their temporal origin. They might arrive as anonymous forum posts, as impossible trading patterns, as quantum fluctuations in laboratory experiments. They might already be here, leaving digital footprints in the vast archives of human knowledge, waiting for us to become sophisticated enough to recognize the traces of tomorrow that have already begun to arrive. The hunt for time travel has become the hunt for signs that the future is already reaching back to touch the present, and those signs are multiplying faster than most people realize. Standing before a time traveler would be like standing before a mirror that reflects not your appearance, but your entire existence stretched across eternity, because their presence would shatter every assumption you've ever made about the nature of reality, consciousness, and what it means to be human in this vast cosmos. Think about it. If someone from the future stood in your living room right now, what would that actually mean? Not just the practical implications, end easy, the technology, the knowledge, the questions you'd want to ask, but the deeper philosophical earthquake that their existence would represent. It would mean that the future already exists in some sense. That tomorrow isn't a blank slate waiting to be written, but a place where someone has already lived, already experienced events that haven't happened yet from your perspective. Your future self might already exist somewhere in space-time, having conversations, making decisions, living a life that feels just as real and immediate to them as this moment feels to you right now. Free will, that fundamental assumption that your choices matter, that you're the author of your own story, suddenly becomes negotiable. If the future already exists, if time travelers can observe it and even travel back to comment on it, then what does that say about your agency? Are you truly making choices, or are you simply playing out a script that's already been written in the fabric of space-time itself? But maybe that's the wrong way to think about it. Maybe time travel doesn't eliminate free will, fee. Maybe it reveals that consciousness is far more powerful than we ever imagined. Maybe the ability to move through time isn't about discovering a predetermined future, but about consciousness, learning to break free from the limitations we thought were absolute. Consider what mortality means in a universe where time travel is possible. Death stops being an ending and becomes something more like a transition. If consciousness can move through time, then the moment of your death isn't the final period at the end of your story, a few verse. It's just one point on a timeline that consciousness can potentially navigate. Your grandmother who died when you were young, in a time travel universe, she doesn't become gone in the way we usually think about death. She becomes elsewhen, located at a different point in space-time, but still existing, still accessible to a consciousness that has learned to move freely through time's dimensions. This transforms grief from permanent loss to temporary separation. It changes love from a race against time to something that exists outside of time altogether. It makes every relationship eternal in a very literal sense, because in a four-dimensional universe where past, present, and future all exist simultaneously, everyone you've ever loved is still out there, still real, still available to someone who knows how to navigate the corridors of time. But it also raises impossible questions about justice and responsibility. If you could travel back in time and prevent tragedies, are you morally obligated to do so? If you have the power to warn people about disasters, to prevent wars, to stop crimes before they happen, does your knowledge make you responsible for every tragedy you don't prevent? And what about the people whose existence depends on those tragedies? The children born to couples who only met because of a disaster you could prevent? The medical breakthroughs that emerged from studying diseases you could eliminate? The art and music and literature that was created in response to suffering you could avoid? Time travel doesn't just give you the power to change the past. It burdens you with the responsibility for every possible version of history. Every choice becomes infinitely complex because you can see all the branching consequences stretching out across time. Yet perhaps this is exactly why we're drawn to the idea of meeting time travelers, not because we want to change the past or peek at the future, but because we want confirmation that we're more than just temporary patterns in an indifferent universe. We want proof that consciousness is special, that human experience matters, that our brief existence has meaning beyond the few decades we get to spend in this particular point in space-time. A time traveler would be living proof that consciousness can transcend its apparent limitations. They would demonstrate that awareness, intelligence, perhaps even individual identity can break free from the sequential prison that seems to define our existence. They would show us that we're not trapped insects in amber, frozen at one moment in cosmic history, but something far more extraordinary, conscious beings capable of experiencing the entire symphony of time rather than just one note. This brings us to perhaps the deepest implication of time travel, what it reveals about the nature of consciousness itself. In our normal experience, consciousness feels like a moving spotlight, illuminating one moment at a time as we progress from past to future. But if time travel is possible, if consciousness can move freely through time, then maybe that spotlight metaphor is wrong. Maybe consciousness isn't trapped in the present moment, sliding helplessly from past to future. Maybe consciousness exists outside of time, experiencing all moments simultaneously, and what we call the present is just where our attention happens to be focused right now. This would explain a lot of mysterious aspects of human experience. Why we can remember the past and anticipate the future. Why dreams sometimes seem to glimpse events that haven't happened yet. Why meditation and certain altered states of consciousness seem to dissolve the normal boundaries of time. Why artists and scientists sometimes report receiving inspiration that feels like it comes from outside their normal thought processes. Maybe we're all time travelers already, but we've just forgotten how to navigate consciously through the temporal dimensions of our existence. But let's bring this back to something personal, something immediate. Imagine that knock actually comes at your door tonight. Imagine that someone from the future stands there, looking at you with eyes that have seen your entire life story, including chapters you haven't written yet. What would you want to know? What would you be afraid to learn? Most people think they'd want to know about the big things, whether humanity survives, whether we solve climate change, whether we make contact with alien life, whether we achieve interstellar travel. But I think the questions that would really matter would be much more personal. You'd want to know if you become the person you hope to become, whether you make the right choices about the relationships that matter to you, whether you find meaning and purpose, whether you contribute something worthwhile to the world, whether you live up to your own potential. But here's what might be the most profound part of that encounter. You'd be looking at evidence of your own future existence. Not just abstract proof that the future exists, but confirmation that you make it there, that you survive whatever challenges lie ahead, that your story continues beyond this moment of uncertainty and doubt. A time traveler from your personal future would be the ultimate reassurance that whatever struggles you're facing right now, whatever problems seem insurmountable, whatever fears keep you awake at night, you get through them. You not only survive, but thrive enough to develop technology that transcends the limitations of linear time. At the same time, they might bring the sobering knowledge that some of your current dreams don't come true, that some of the paths you're considering lead to dead ends, that some of the people you care about now won't be part of your future story. Meeting your future self would be the ultimate mirror, showing you not just who you are, but who you become. And like any honest mirror, it might show you things you're not prepared to see. But maybe that's exactly what we need. Maybe humanity's obsession with time travel isn't really about changing the past or controlling the future. Maybe it's about the deep human need to understand our place in the larger story, to see our lives from a perspective that transcends the narrow viewpoint of any single moment. We're the only species that's truly aware of our own mortality, the only creatures that understand that our time is limited. That awareness creates a kind of existential anxiety that runs through all human experience. The knowledge that nothing lasts forever, that everyone we love will eventually die, that our own consciousness will someday simply stop. Time travel offers the possibility that this anxiety is based on a misunderstanding, that death isn't really an ending, but a change of perspective, that the people we lose aren't really gone, but relocated to different points in space-time, that consciousness itself might be far more durable and flexible than our everyday experience suggests. In preparing for the possibility of time travelers, we're really preparing for a new understanding of what it means to be human. We're getting ready for the discovery that we're not temporary accidents in an indifferent universe, but conscious beings capable of experiencing reality from perspectives that transcend our apparent limitations. The knock at your door might never come. The time traveler might remain forever in the realm of dreams and speculation. But the act of preparing for them, of seriously considering what their existence would mean, changes us already. It opens us to the possibility that reality is far stranger and more wonderful than we assume. It encourages us to think beyond the boundaries of our normal experience. It reminds us that the universe might have room for miracles, that the impossible might just be the improbable waiting for the right conditions. And maybe that's enough. Maybe the real value of thinking about time travelers isn't in meeting them, but in allowing their possibility to expand our sense of what's possible. Maybe the real time travel happens when we stop seeing ourselves as prisoners of sequential time and start seeing ourselves as conscious beings capable of experiencing the eternal from within the temporal. So when that knock comes, whether it's from a time traveler, a neighbor, or just the wind, remember that you're already part of something extraordinary. You're a pattern of consciousness that emerged from hydrogen and starlight, a way for the universe to know itself, a temporary arrangement of matter and energy that has somehow become aware of its own existence. You're already miraculous. Time travel would just make that miracle a little more obvious. The future is out there, somewhere in the vast landscape of space-time, waiting for us to develop the wisdom and technology to reach it. But we don't have to wait for time machines to begin experiencing the wonder of existence beyond linear time. We can start right now, in this moment, by recognizing that consciousness itself is the greatest time travel technology ever developed. Every memory is a journey to the past. Every dream of the future is a reconnaissance mission through time. Every moment of love transcends the normal boundaries of temporal existence. Every act of imagination creates new possibilities in the space between what was and what could be. We are all time travelers, navigating the strange and beautiful landscape of consciousness in time. The question isn't whether we'll meet visitors from the future, but whether we'll recognize that we're already citizens of eternity, temporarily focused on this particular moment in an infinite conversation between past, present, and future. The knock at the door might be coming from the outside, but the real-time travel begins from within, and that journey starts now.